Hi, Lisa Pierce here, Executive Editor of Packaging Digest, and I'm joined by Tom Zaki, the CEO and founder of TerraCycle and Loop. And today our topic is going to be packaging sustainability goals. So a lot of brands have set packaging sustainability goals, and some of them have been set for 2025, some out to 2030. But what we wanted to do was just talk a little bit, chat a little bit about these goals, where we are, and maybe a little bit of what's next. So Tom, welcome. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me.
So these goals that packaging or companies have set for packaging sustainability, a lot of them were to 2025. Why do you think? Is that a magic date or what's going on?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, historically, companies used to set on their own different packaging goals, and usually 5 years out or 10 years out from when they set them. And there was a bunch of these random goals with random dates. Then really, to major credit to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, they created a unified strategy, basically asking companies, starting about in 2015, to commit by 2025 to have their packaging recyclable, reusable, or compostable, and separately to start integrating larger amounts of recycled content into their packaging. And really, true credit to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. They did a great job convincing many organizations to sign on to this external goal. And that's why the vast majority of organizations have these formal commitments around 2025. Now, some folks who may not have joined the Ellen MacArthur Foundation packaging goals, but wanted to sort of be a part of this movement, may have then set their own independent goals for 2025 or 2030. And some, maybe to hedge the bet, would have called them ambitions instead of goals.
Okay, I like that, ambitions. Yes. So I guess that kind of leads into my next question. When these goals were set, how realistic were those timeframes?
Well, one of the sort of interesting things here is that these goals were at 10 years. I mean, could be 10 years ago, if not more. Ellen MacArthur Foundation has been working on this diligently for quite a while. And I think, and this is sort of the interesting thing, is that when the goal is so far away, it's very easy to commit to ambitious goals. Very likely the person committing to it will not be in the same chair when goals come to fruition. And maybe there is the assumption of, the whole industry will get together, major third parties will create infrastructure innovations. In other words, it'll somehow happen, it'll somehow come to be. And so I think many people jumped in, and I know certainly because I've talked to many heads of sustainability or heads of packaging in organizations, many times organizations jumped in with absolutely no concrete plan to achieve the goal, nevertheless, the ambition to do so.
Sure. So now here we are, about 3 years away, coming up on 3 years away from those deadlines. Are most of the companies on track, or why or why not would they be on track?
Yeah, so it's look, there's so many companies who've joined. The answer is not black and white, but I would say it is more disappointing than exciting in general, unfortunately. And I think, but it's important to first give credit that companies even tried. I think that's so important before we start going into, oh, they failed, right? So it's really important to give credit that they even tried, because there's no today legal obligation or anything like that to try whatsoever. Now, why I say it's a mixed bag is some companies started from a very good starting point. If you're a beverage company like say Coca-Cola or PepsiCo, a big part of your packaging is already locally recyclable. So there's relatively little, especially if you're, say, Coca-Cola, where you're a beverage company, Pepsi being half food, of course, but in Coke's case, a big part of your packaging is already recyclable or reusable, so there's very little bit left to work on.
Sure.
Inversely, if you're...
because two of the most recycled packaging formats out there are aluminum beverage cans and single-serve, mostly beverage PET bottles.
You're exactly right. Yeah. If you take something like a Coke, what are their primary packaging forms? You're exactly right. PET bottles, most desirable packaging form in recycling centers. And then you can do little shifts, like changing the color of a Sprite bottle from green to white, or sorry, green to clear, excuse me. That's an upgrade. but you're staying in the same form. You're just changing polymer color. Aluminum, which is a recycled material type out there. You may have cartons, which in different countries have different levels of recyclability, but they already have some level of recyclability. Then you have a very small amount of exotics like pouches, but they represent a tiny little fraction of the whole. And then, of course, you have glass bottles. Many of those in countries like Germany would already be returnable, I mean, reusable and so on. That's a good starting point.
Right.
Now, if you go and different organization, let's say you're a food company, let's say Mars or Mondelez, the vast majority of your packaging is flexible, multi-layered laminate. So there, it's a monumental task to be able to shift that to become practically recyclable. And I think every company over the past decade has tried. Now, at the beginning of the journey, what I noticed companies were focused on were more, let's get the industry together. Let's hope big infrastructure changes come up. I heard a lot about chemical recycling, saving the day, many people hanging their hopes there. As we are now, 2 years to go and change, I think where the focus has shifted is what packaging shifts can I do, if possible, to make my packaging more conducive to recycling. People call that recycle ready or designed for recycling. Neither of those two terms mean recyclable, mind you. They just
Correct.
mean better for recycling, or better theoretically for recycling. And that's where they have shifted, trying to stay within the constraints of their manufacturing process, but making the packaging better for recycling. It doesn't mean it crosses over and becomes recyclable. In some cases it does, and in some cases it does not.
Okay, I have to ask a clarification question here because I'm a word person, not necessarily a math person, but I've said, 3 years out, you said 2 plus some change. So I guess I was assuming that most companies would have through 2025 to finish hitting their goals. But I think
Sure.
you're thinking maybe at the beginning of the year, just a minor point there, but
yeah.
2025 could be January, it could be December, as long as we're in that same year.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think the important thing here is both points are correct. And so let's say somewhere between 2.5 and 3.5 years from now is when this comes due.
Okay. All right. Excellent. So you've already given one of what I would call maybe a secret for some of the companies who are going to hit these goals, where there's already recycling infrastructure in place. The material is valuable. The recyclate material has value in the market. So there's that pull through. But are there any other secrets of some of the companies that are on track?
So I think what hasn't really been, has come to fruition, I think, as folks may have held hope, if you will, is the secret, silver bullet of suddenly, let's say, chemical recycling becomes the main backbone of recycling, can handle mixed, almost MSW, municipal solid waste, and everything comes out, in virgin oil state. That was a dream and is not, that's not going to be in play by 2025 in that way. Then I think what some companies have done, have said, let's take that existing package form and make some modest design changes that maybe like the Sprite bottle moving from green to clear, like some confection packages moving from polymer to fiber, like going from multi-layer to mono material. So how do we take the existing way we produce a product and honestly simplify it, right? Simplify color, simplify number of materials, or shift material types. And those, in some cases, have tipped over and produced a really good outcome. Notable examples are in the confection space. We've seen a number of confection brands. Kit Kat, a good example, move from polymer packaging to fiber packaging, and that's make it recycle paper stream. We've seen the example of colored PET bottles moving to clear. That's made it recyclable in the PET supply chain. This idea now of multi-layer to monolayer has worked in some cases very well, and some cases will not have a major effect. So what I mean by that is in like the toothpaste tube, which we've seen Colgate begin, and then other companies have done as well, P&G, Unilever, and so on. They move from a multi-layer aluminumized polyethylene into a mono HDPE tube, and that in countries that have strong recycling systems has worked well. It's not as easy to make that work in countries that have manual sortation for their recycling centers or underfunded recycling. But in wealthy countries, certainly that's an incredible step and renders it a recyclable curbside. And I think that's the same in moving from multi-layer films to monolayer films, where it's not as simple as just making that shift. If you have wet content on the inside of that package, then it likely in no country will become recycled. If you have dry content, similar to the toothpaste tube, in countries that have strong recycling backbones, it may be recycled. And in countries where it's manually sorted or recycling backbones, it will not be. It's no matter what, and this is very important, it's an upgrade. It
Right.
is a upgrade and the right thing for companies to do. But we should be very cautious, especially, and I think I would put a caution out to the industry at all. Terms like designed for recycling, recycle ready, it's almost like the PIC code of 30, 40 years ago, the plastic identification code, which is the number inside something
Right.
that looks like a
The
recycling
resin
logo.
ID. Mm-hmm.
I got to tell you, these terms, recycle ready and designed for recycling, will be criticized deeply in 10, 20 years when they are seen as, manipulating consumer perception. Because what it really means is I'm upgrading the pack, making it better for recyclers, but it does not mean what on the face of it seems like is that it is going to be locally recyclable.
I know a lot of people have been talking about what brand owners can do to further the acceptability of their packaging for recycling. And when they say that, they're usually talking about curbside recycling at the municipal level. And there's so much, there's so much behind the scenes from that point of view. But not to jump the gun and start talking about the future already, but you're very close to this because of how TerraCycle works, taking better control at the end of life for various brands. But before we get there, which we will, tell me, Tom, what's going to happen if and when companies don't reach those goals?
So I have a prediction on this. And I can actually say it to you over the next 36 months, what I think is going to unfold, 23, 24, 25. So in 2023, we are going to be in a very tough economic environment. Europe, UK in the developed countries is right now the epicenter of the economic decline. It is really, the British pound is almost equal to $1 as of today. There's so much challenges. And then what is going to be a very tough winter with energy prices coming. Europe is the next sort of in that bullseye, and then the rest of the world. And so it's important to note that in a time of recession, and amplified in different degrees in these different markets, sustainability will suffer, no question. People will prioritize short-term economics on retaining their staff, on making cost of living go down, over longer-term investments like sustainability.
Like they had to do during COVID.
Right, exactly right. And so first, it hasn't been easy. The past 2 years and the next year leading into these goals coming due have been a lot of headwind that was not expected or could have been predicted. So that's the first thing. Is 23 is going to be soft. People are going to just be struggling with things that are outside this domain. What I think is going to then happen in 2024 is people are going to start getting concerned that there's going to be catastrophic failure in 2025 vis-a-vis these goals, and we'll start making big consumer-facing launches. We'll start doing whatever they can, whether launching voluntary take-back programs, whether making these, their packaging compostable, or moving towards mono materials and things of this nature. And then will come 2025, where, look, it will have gotten, by then, over the past 10 years, there will have been improvements that people can point to. There's no question. This has been a great journey to make these commitments. But what the lay public will see is a lot of failure. And you know how the media is today. There's way better clicks out there on saying recycling is a lie or recycling is a failure, or companies have completely, those get better clicks than something a bit more subtle saying this many companies made, this part of the business made the goal, this struggled for this important reason, blah, blah, blah. And so there's going to be a lot of anger. It's going to be a lot of consumer anger, NGO anger, lawmakers, all these sort of, parties. And then I think what's going to happen as a response from companies And I've asked, many of the leadership, C-level folks at these companies where they may struggle meeting the goal, what are you going to do? And what I hear unanimously is they will say, we did what we can, but these other industries, didn't produce the infrastructure or couldn't do this. And so we failed, not because we failed, but we did what we could, but others didn't comply. A good example of this, back when Starbucks made their commitment in 2008 to make their cups recyclable. I think it was by 2013 or 2015. I can't quite remember, but somewhere in there, and it didn't work. They said, well, it didn't work. We know you can recycle a cup, and look, everything in the world is technically recyclable. You can collect coffee cups and hydropulp them and recycle them. And they went on a tour to show recyclers this is how you do it. And the recyclers chose not to implement that, partly because it would cost them more money than it's worth. And that was the logic pattern that was then stated back to say, these cups can be recycled. We showed people how to do it. They just chose not to implement. And I think this will be the same thing in 2025. It's going to be sort of pointing the finger, at some part of the supply chain. It could be recyclers. It could be, other aspects. I think a lot of it will be pointed towards recyclers saying, we made our packaging recycle ready or designed for recycling, but the recyclers are choosing not to recycle it. Something along those lines is my prediction for what will happen. And I think it's going to take almost all of 2025 to get that through the digestive system before people calm down and think about, okay, how do we take a step forward to continue solving this very important challenge?
Right. Okay. I agree with everything that you've said, Tom, and thank you for sharing that, because I think it will help companies prepare a little bit better for what's going to happen, and maybe be an incentive now for more partnerships, more collaboration, because as you rightly identified, these goals that were set, a lot of times there are things outside of the company's control, and you have to work with other people and set up an infrastructure and all that, and that does take the entire, anybody who's involved in that.
Well, I just want to add on that. One of the things that that I saw in this unfold, the very first commitment made to now, in 2 or 3 years from now, when the commitments are due, the white elephant in the room was never discussed. People started focusing mostly on how can I change my packaging slightly to make it more conducive to recycling, right? Go the most iconic example, go from multi-layer film to mono-layer film. That's the most iconic of the examples. And then they talked about how do we make investments in, or how do we encourage infrastructure, to appear. Wonderful actors like Closed Loop Fund and others, who started, acting in that, and so on. But the white elephant in the room.
Before you identify the white elephant in the room, can I kind of guess what it is?
Please, actually go for it. Yes.
Because of other conversations that we have had. Is it product consumption?
Well, it's both, actually. So I was going to say, but you're absolutely right, right? It's the white elephant in the room in this issue. It's not about package design. It's not about infrastructure. It's about the underlying economics, right? So what I mean by this is recyclers have no legal connection to the producers. They are not legally responsible to the producers. In fact, a recycler is not even legally responsible to recycle what's in the blue bin or what's in the recycling bin. What a recycler does is tell us, here's what I'd like to see in the blue bin. Then they take what you put in the blue bin and sort out what they actually want. And what they want is what they can make money at. There is no law anywhere in the world that says what you put in a recycling bin must be recycled.
Which is why I believe that if the municipalities are not recycling enough or properly, or doing their due diligence, then we should find another way. Take it away from them.
Yeah, and I think, look, the answer in this is we have to look at the economics, right? And what's interesting in package design is, what's the biggest megatrend in packaging is lightweighting, cost reduction is by far the biggest trend. And it has been it has been since the dawn of packaging, right? Procurement's #1 goal, reduce cost per unit. And it's fair, I get that, right? Now, what happens is a recycler is looking for value, right? They want to do the least amount of work to get the most amount of value out of the waste. So as packaging gets lighter, it intrinsically becomes less desirable to recyclers.
Yes.
And so the biggest mega trend in packaging actually is equal to less things will be recycled. It undermines recyclability. So the only thing that, like, what can companies do? Really, it's not about some like funky R&D. I think it's about, one option is you put value back into the package. You go from a pouch to a PET bottle. You go from a PET bottle to an aluminum can, you know, something like that. Now, that will incur a cost per unit for every product produced because you will increase the price, right? So that's one. That will certainly work. Another is doing some form of taxation, be DRS, deposit return schemes, EPR, extended product responsibility, which somehow creates a money flow. Now, what that does is it makes everything slightly better economically, where what you will see is in aluminum can recycling, the rates will go through the roof, almost to 100%, like in Germany. While in things that are not profitable to recycle, the boost may not be enough to make it recycled at all. And just like in Germany, a lot of in the yellow bin there will still go to incineration because it still hasn't tipped over to be profitable. That's right. And we're seeing that come. Oregon, Maine, now other states are passing EPR, but important to know, silver bullet. It'll the things that are profitable to recycle, and it may tip a few things over like polypropylene, and then everything else will probably have no effect. And then you can do voluntary responsibility. And mind you, in those, it's a tax on every product produced. Right? So the first one, increasing value, is an investment into every item produced. EPR is a tax on every product produced.
Produced or sold, Tom?
Oh, it depends on the law. Very good question.
Okay.
It does depend on the country. Sometimes produced, sometimes sold. Depends on the country and how it's administered. But if we assume everything produced is sold, then you can say those are synonyms for all intents and purposes. I know it's not quite equal, but for sake of conversation. Then the third one, it's like what TerraCycle does, we call voluntary responsibility, which is like take back program, some form of collection, where it's a cost on every item that is actually collected. There's three choices. Now, they're not independent. You can do all three, right? But those are net the three choices. And why I say they're the three choices is infrastructure magically appears when there are good business equations for it to serve, and magically disappears when there are poor business equations for it to serve. So it's not about, I think, investing into infrastructure. It's about creating the right flow of materials so that the infrastructure appears, right? Like if there is, you know, a field that has really accessible, let's say, gold on it, you will build a factory to go get the gold. And if the field has very little gold, you'll choose not to. Or once you've mined the gold, you'll shutter the factory. So I think infrastructure is a reaction to a good business equation.
Okay.
And what we need to do, and this is the white elephant in the room, is there has to be enough value material to make it a good business equation. And that's the key component to consider.
Okay, so we need to the brands need to focus a little bit more on the end market for whatever whatever packaging material they're going to be generating as a recyclate.
Yes, and I'd say it's focus on the profitability to the recycler, because the recycler has the cost of collecting and sorting the waste. It has the cost of processing the waste, and it has to compare those costs against what the material, once it's been recycled, can be sold for, the recyclate. And the more profitable that equation, the more recyclers will go chase it. The more they're going to educate consumers to put it in the bin, the more they're going to focus on sorting it out, the more they're going to do the work. And the less desirable it is, the more they're not going to bother.
So what's going to be who's going to get the brand owners and the recyclers aligned? How's that going to happen?
I think it's not one answer here. I think there are many actors that can do it, and I think many are leaning in. So let's go through sort of the stakeholder groups and what the stakeholder groups can do. In the world of lawmakers and legislation, there is some really exciting work happening. There is work in passing taxes like EPR, finally coming to the United States. Oregon, Maine get the credit for being the first two, but I think you're going to see this a lot in the more blue, wealthier states. It'll come first. Should be a federal thing, but but either way, let's take it state by state, sort of like how Canada's provincial EPR.
Okay,
that's going to help create some money flows to again make those equations easier to attain. So that's good. Lawmakers are also passing more truth in labeling legislation. The biggest and most ambitious being SB 343 in the state of California. And what this is basically doing is elevating the way the word recyclable or the Chasing Arrow logo can be used. Historically, the FTC through the Green Guides has regulated that to be used if there is access, in the US 60% or more access to, say, recycling a material type like polypropylene. You can put the Chasing Arrow logo and say locally recyclable or just recyclable. With SB 343 in the state of California, and there's now 5 to 10 states that are doing copycat legislation, and not going to have different labeling in one state versus the other, so it'll de facto become federal. The state has to also agree that it will be recycled. And this will mean that about a third to a half of products that used to have today the Chasing Arrow logo and the word recyclable will no longer be able to carry that. The goal is this puts pressure on producers to shift from those package forms or polymer forms to the ones that are collected and recycled. So that's what legislation can do.
Right, Tom, earlier you mentioned the 3 different ways for collection.
Yes.
Though that Chasing Arrow law for California, I'm assuming, is at the municipality level, right? Like if you had a voluntary program, would it still qualify?
It's a very good question. And so staying in that one, what SB 343 focuses on is 2 things. One, defining that the Chasing Arrow logo and the word recyclable only be used in the context of municipal recycling. It is really making that the domain of municipal recycling.
Okay.
Because the word recyclable, and I agree with them, I think they're absolutely right, is a claim that consumers will assume means it's municipally, you can put it in your blue bin. And the Chasing Arrow logo is the same. You'll no longer be able to use a PIC code. So you won't be able to put the triangle Chasing Arrow logo with a number 1 or number 2 or number 3 in it on a package. That PIC code goes away. It will have to be a different shape. And those will be determined only for municipal recycling. And in this new definition of it has to have access of 60% or more, and according to Cal Recycle, must actually be collected and recycled. So material types, that we very widely associate with recyclability, like polypropylene, that will be a key question mark, noting Cal Recycle still in the process of opining on what it believes is recycled in the state and what it believes is not. Polystyrene is a great example that will certainly move to no longer be able to carry that mark. Now, for programs that are not municipal recycling, like TerraCycle programs or many other take-back programs, what we would advise a brand owner, if they use one of our programs, is to say, don't use the word recyclable, do not use the Chasing Arrow logo, but say something like recycle through TerraCycle or something along those lines, because that's simply a statement of what you can do. It's not making a claim that this package is recyclable municipally. And I think that's the very, very important distinction to make. You can also, if you wish, strengthen that even more by saying underneath, for sake of clarity, do not put this in municipal recycling or something along those lines. And we see some brand owners do that, where they say, not locally recyclable, recycle with or recycle through TerraCycle.
Okay. I wonder how this would affect the how to recycle and how to compost labels from the Sustainable Packaging Coalition.
It 100% will have an effect, because those labels use the Chasing Arrow logo and they say recycle. And I believe that how to recycle, labeling will simply have to comply with the SB 343 legislation. There's no question. And that means that some pack forms that may have had a recycle locally label through how to recycle may now not be able to carry that in that particular example. And again, right now, Cal Recycle, the body that is deciding on what goes on the list and does not, is in careful consideration, doing meetings around this. And I believe at the end of this year or sometime near the end of this year, we'll have their decisions. Or sorry, it could be into next year, my apologies, but it'll have it rendered over this year and next year, and then it goes into effect in 2024.
Okay. Wow, a lot going on. Some a little, I have to say, a little scary to me because of the wide-ranging implications and maybe some unintended consequences because of that.
Yeah, and so we went through, right, stakeholder, they can do, this is lawmakers, right?
That's right, the stakeholders.
No worries, just to give you the others, right? This is lawmakers.
Yep.
I think for the industry, especially for brand owners, it's those three things we mentioned earlier. You can upgrade the value in the package, which will make it more locally recyclable. So a good example is move from, if you're in a pouch, move to a carton. If you're in a carton, move to a PET. If you're a beverage, move to a PET bottle. If you're in a PET bottle, move to an aluminum can or glass. Go up. Now that will increase your cost per every item produced. And be a part of EPR where it comes. Now you're going to do that anyway because you have no choice. That's going to be mandated. Yep. No one's going to voluntarily pay an EPR bill if it doesn't exist. And then the way you voluntarily do that is you set up your own programs. And those are the three, like your own take back programs. Those are the three things the brand owners can do. And the general answer on recyclability is simplify and increase value. Simplify means go from many materials to ideally one material. It means going from lots of colors and adornments to clear. It means going from labels that like attach on to direct printing or something. It's simplify in all ways and increase value. Go from cheap materials to more expensive materials, right? Those are the two things that make that item more desirable for recyclers.
Right. Okay. So does that lead us into the next stakeholder, the recycler?
Yes. Well, so for the recycler, right? I think the important thing for recyclers to do is they're very good at talking to consumers and trying to sort of educate consumers. But I think there's a real opportunity for recyclers to be very clear with producers about what they want. And the way to do this, is to think about how to create, and there's some nice coalitions of recyclers who've gotten together, but the more recyclers could talk with a voice and say, this is what we want in our stream, and this is what we don't. Because in the end, the recyclers make the decision on what is recycled or not. No one else does. It's their decision.
And when you say producers, you're talking about the package manufacturers, not the brand owners.
Both.
Okay, both.
Because here's sort of the interesting thing is many times package manufacturers will talk about the technical capability of a package, right? They will talk about it will. A good example is biodegradables, right? It will degrade, and it's absolutely true. But what really needs to be asked is not what a package can do, but what the end-of-life manager will do. So a good example in compostables is while compostable packaging will absolutely degrade, every claim you see is absolutely true, composters don't want it. Right?
Yeah.
And that is really important to go to the actual end-of-life manager, and they need to communicate what they want. And in lieu of that, people need to ask them, what is it that you want to see? Not what you could do, because you got false positive, but instead, what will you do if this shows up? So why do composters not like compostable plastics? Is because within compostable plastics, there's a huge degree. From the worst out there, oxo-degradable, that's probably the worst, to home compostable, the best. But there's a huge plethora of range in there. And then when consumers are putting this in the green waste, they also tend to put in things that are not degradable. And it's so ridiculously expensive to take, mixed food and yard waste that is sloppy and rotting and so on with all these plastics inside and sort out the plastics and then from there subsort which are which. It's much easier to sort them all out and dispose them, which is what tends to happen today.
Well, not only that, but the compostable facilities, they're selling a product at the end, compost.
That's
and
exactly right.
They need it to be as high quality as possible. And compostable packaging really doesn't contribute nutrients to their product that they sell, the compost.
Exactly right. And I think this is the key point, right? It's asking the question, not what can be done, but what will be done. I mean, I could take it as a joke. I could ask you today many could you questions, some pretty provocative ones, where you would technically answer, yes, I could, do something crazy. And you would absolutely not do it if I say, now, will you do it, right? And I think there's this huge difference. And I see this a lot where producers, both packaging producers or brand owners, will bring in a excited recycler or a composter and say, could you, recycle this or compost this? And they'll say, sure, I could. But they're not asking the question of, okay, now when you're watching and you got to spend your own money, will you?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay. So we did the brand owners, the lawmakers, recyclers. Who else is in the
So
chain?
I would say the next one there is consumers, right?
Okay.
And consumers have the all-empowered vote, which is, vote with your dollar for what you want and what you don't want to see more of, and participate in these programs, right? So consumers, without consumer participation, no recycling occurs, right? So consumers must participate. And that I really say this because there's so much media out there about how recycling is broken or there's some problem, right? And that undermines consumer motivation to take part
Sure.
in the system. And we need to make sure we don't undermine consumers actually taking part. Because you need a consumer to actually put something in the recycling bin for anything to be recycled. The consumer has that choice in the end. And every package will go through a consumer's hand, and the consumer will choose, does it go in the trash bin or does it go in the recycling bin? And we have to be very conscious of that. And then the second is, the message to consumers, please recycle, please take part, right? Even if your system isn't perfect, use it, take. And then the second is feed the the recyclers what they want versus what they don't want. So it's almost the same as the producer, but the answer to the consumers, buy the things that recyclers want and feed the waste stream that, and don't buy the things that recyclers don't want, right? Feed the system what it needs.
Right. Oh, that makes total sense. Tom, any other stakeholders in there that you want to talk about?
People would ask is like, where do we keep, the people who always get let off the hook are the packaging manufacturers or even the chemical companies and the oil companies. So oil companies take the oil out of the ground, the chemical companies convert it, and then into a more advanced polymer, and then the packaging companies convert the polymer into packaging. Those sort of three groups of folks, and I would say I would loop them in very similarly with the brand owners, because in the end, it's the oil companies to the chemical companies to the packaging companies to the brand owners that create the package. The brand owner decides, which version to use, but that's all sort of one group with four heads on it, right? So similar answers. And then the only other group, if I think that we haven't talked about yet, are the retailers. And retailers have a really interesting opportunity to do, I think, two meaningful things. First, they are the ultimate editor, between the brand owner and the consumer, right?
Yep.
So they can choose out of all the products that are out there in the world, which ones the consumers have access to.
So when you're talking retailers, you're talking retailers and e-tailers, the e-commerce. Okay,
e-com, brick and mortar,
Yep.
Doesn't matter. But in the end, unless the brand is its own retailer, which is a DTC model, right? So the brand can be its own retailer.
Direct to consumer.
In most cases, the brand, that's right. The brand has to go through a retailer, and the retailer is a editor as a result. It's a gate. And I think the bravest thing retailers can do, and I give a lot of credit to Tesco here, is edit to make it easier for consumers to choose the right things and not choose the wrong things, so the wrong things aren't even there. So Tesco, for example, famously banned selling biodegradable packaging on its shelves as of 2009 of any product, period, full stop. And it just said, we're just not going to make this choice available. And I think retailers, the stronger they can make these decisions, the better, right? Amplify, give bigger display support to the things that are more circular, more recyclable. Ideally delete or de-amplify the ones that are less so. And it has that choice of what it puts on the shelf, where is it on the shelf, how much of it is on the shelf. All of those choices are in the unilateral control of the retailer. That's one. The second is retailers can also be a part of the infrastructure. They can be collection points for certain waste streams. And I think what's important is we have a certain sort of fee, like waste that can flow through the municipal setting. But there's many waste streams that may not be appropriate there, but can absolutely flow through the retailer setting. I mean, plastic shopping bags are collected at a lot of retailers. All the way to clothing is collected not through municipal, but through locations, from churches to Walmarts around the world.
Okay, a lot going on there, a lot of great ideas. I do have to ask, because the vast majority of the packaging, the biggest markets for packaging are food and beverage.
Yes.
And there's, a tiny little thing that they need that some other products might not need, and that's called barrier. And we, the people who are in the industry and learn about sustainability do learn that food waste is much worse of a problem than the packaging waste is. And so how do we solve this barrier problem, Tom, with sustainable materials?
It's a really, really good question. And I think there are multiple, it's not one answer, right?
Never is.
Never, right? So I think there's a lot of amazing innovation in unique barriers that may be edible, like it's rayon type barrier or other forms of barriers, not just say a plastic wrap. So I think one is innovations in the concept of barriers. I think their edible packaging is a really interesting example that could be a part of the product or the fruit and vegetable. Then the next area is how to make sure that we actually get good collection and recycling of existing barriers. From there, it's thinking more, if we're going to eliminate the barrier altogether, how to eliminate the wastage that occurs when the product expires over a shorter period of time.
Yep.
And I think these are the types of examples that we have to experiment with and think about. Again, it's not one or the other or the other. All of the above can be leveraged in parallel. It's all the way to exploring, redefining best buy dates. I mean, I was talked to many retailers where, like Carrefour, for example, recently in France was able to eliminate best buy dates on some products where it makes absolutely no sense to have one, but there is one, right? Yes. And let's remember, there is some irony behind things. The irony in best buy dates is that in many cases, it's more profitable to have best buy dates sooner than later because it moves the inventory through by disposition. And so I think we also have to be aware of where there is an underlying profit motivation for something that is unsustainable.
There is consumer psychology behind that. There's also the, retailer ownership, who owns the product at the time that it expires, and yes. So economics, as you have
economics and liability, right? In the U.S., the food waste issue is very tied to liability of, many restaurants don't donate, or supermarkets donate the unwanted food because they're worried about whoever they donated to getting sick. So there is economics and liability, although liability is a derivative of economics, right? In the end, you're worried about a payout in the concept of liability.
Yeah. Okay. Tom, thank you so much. This is fascinating, and I have two questions that we're gonna end with, and it'll still be a strong ending. But so big picture, packaging sustainability, and the company's objectives. The reason for sustainability goals in general, not just packaging sustainability, but sustainability goals in general is because of climate change and saving the planet. If you want to look at, let's go as far out as we can and look at the big picture. So the objectives that companies have, whether they meet these goals by the date or not, how much of a difference are those goals going to have on that big picture?
It's a very good question. First, I would say, as we look at this, we are in a crisis, from an environmental crisis altogether. All sorts of vectors are significantly challenged. Whether it's animal diversity. I think we've lost half of our species diversity over the past 50 plus years. Whether it's natural habitat through deforestation, encroachment, and so on. Then we have things like air quality, water quality. We have the waste crisis. We have all these different issues. And then, at the top of it, climate change is the one that is the biggest of all, because it seems to have the most immediate threat on our existence. And of course, we're most concerned about ourselves. And then, if we have the bandwidth, we're going to think about our fellow inhabitants like plants and animals. But I think the biggest existential threat to us today is climate change. Where will our home burn down? Will we have food on our table because of agriculture, so on and so forth? So I think why I say that is it's important to acknowledge that, we are in there's like multiple major issues that are very different on environment that are all trending very negatively. And we are right now, most of the oxygen in the room is going towards the concept of change. Now, all of these are connected, right?
Yes.
But it's important to not say climate change is the only thing we have to solve for, and then we're good, right? And so a good example of this is in the world of, we have, if you just compare two issues, the waste crisis and climate change, yes, there is a Venn diagram overlap. And what I mean by that is recycling is significantly better from a greenhouse gas emission or GHG potential than disposal. Reuse is better than recycling from a climate change point of view, then, and so on. So that those, as you move up the waste hierarchy, you're also doing more greenhouse gas reduction, right? You're still producing greenhouse gas, but at a lesser rate than those other options. But for example, climate change will not, when you measure climate change, mostly in GHG, you're not going to then vector in, well, what about, the negative effects of litter, the negative effects of extraction, that's so on, that also contribute to the waste issue. That's why it's important to sort of have room to look at both climate change and everything else. But it is incredibly connected, all in all. And I think in this, and I think this is, if there's any big monster white elephant in all of this, it is what you said, right? All environmental issues in the world have one unifying starting point. It's actually incredibly simple. We all do it, which is the act of buying things. And we individually are buying an order of magnitude more goods than we did 100 years ago on every vector. Number of socks in our drawers, the amount of meat we consume. I mean, you name it, it has exploded at a minimum of an order of magnitude. And there's many things that we buy a lot of today that we never even bought 100 years ago, right? Tons of things. The headphones in our ears, just to name one simple example, right? Never even existed. So it's multiplied from a zero base.
Right.
And I don't think whether the object is, disposable or recyclable or reusable or you name it, that there's any object that has no impact. And so what we have to really think about, and it's so tremendously difficult for business to do this, is we have to reduce consumption. It's incredibly difficult to do that individually because our whole culture is built on status equals consumption, volume of consumption equals our status. Happiness comes from shopping, all these things. We have to think about that as individuals. And we have to also think about that as truly it's the only answer as you think about sustainability in business. It doesn't matter how circular or whatever we become, even reuse has impact. And so, and that's a really difficult, thing. And it's what very few people spend any time talking about because it's very uncomfortable in the context of making money.
So, bottom line, you do think that packaging, recycling, and lowering consumption is going to make a difference with climate change? Okay.
Yes, my apologies. Yes.
No, that's fine. Just, I know it's kind of like a big complex question that, again, sort of has an easy answer that's not easy, kind of like, can you recycle this? Yes, but will you? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So last question, Tom, and thank you so much for your time. So after 2025, what's next for the brands as it relates very specifically to packaging sustainability, and then why those?
I think, as I said, 2025 is going to be a tumultuous, turbulent year. And my recommendation, to a brand owner is honor that you tried, right? Focus on, on the effort, the great effort that was done, even if you didn't meet 100% of the goals, right? Honor that internally, especially internally, because you don't want people to lose motivation and give up. Honor it internally and try to tell that story externally. Try to avoid pointing fingers and being like, oh, had the chemical industry produced major chemical recycling infrastructure, had the recycling industry done this or whatever, had our industry of pet food producers or cosmetic brand producers, whatever it may be, had that happen, don't finger outward. Instead, point it inward and say, okay, this is what we accomplished. We accomplished 80% of our goals, which means we didn't accomplish 20%. but we put in a major effort. We really tried and celebrate that internally and communicate it externally, first and foremost, to make the turbulence as little as possible. And trust me, it will be the most easy thing to say, let me point the finger and say it was someone else's responsibility of why it didn't happen. Then regroup and really think about how to continue that phenomenal effort, right? If you're a brand owner and moved from multi-materials to mono-materials, that is a phenomenal thing you did. That is really good. Even if in the country where you deployed it, it didn't make a difference on whether that material is recycled, that is a huge improvement and should be honored. And don't stop there. Think about how to continue this journey and keep pushing. And I think if the effort continues, and it's been now 10 years since most people have signed on to this pledge and can continue forward, we have, I think, a very optimistic future. My big worry is that there'll be a lot of finger pointing and people will say, forget this and give up. And that would be catastrophic.
I agree, catastrophic, and kind of minimize all the developments and all the advancements that we've lived through already from there. Right. So, yeah. Tom, thank you. As always, in talking with you, you've given me a lot more to think about. And so the good news about that is after some of these ideas germinate a little bit, I'm going to be coming back to you.
Well, I look forward to that conversation. Absolutely.
Okay. Thanks so much, Tom.
Thank you as well. Have a good afternoon.
Appreciate your time. Bye.
Thank you.